presentation so that we are not caught wanting later on. Thank you, Chair.
That's fine. HOT, can you have the roving mic? Make sure you don't confuse the presentations for today.
Yes, greetings, chairs, honorable premiers, honorable members, colleagues. Yeah. Are we not flighting? Okay. Okay. No, here obviously we'll just go straight to the contents. As human settlements, the main programs that we, especially under emergency, we've got. Oh yes, stand up. Okay. You know, being told sometimes. Yeah. I was hoping that it will also be flighted so we can just move with speed. In terms of the tools utilized during disaster relief and recovery.
HOT?
Yes.
I might be the only one who knows you very well. So
yeah,
it will be in order to
apologies.
introduce yourself for the others.
Yes, apologies, honorable members. It's Mdu Zungu, KZN Human Settlements, HOD. Is that obviously with my seniors around today? Yeah, I'm just going to highlight the tools that we use under the Human Settlements grants, especially for emergency, for other members. We've got the emergency housing program. I think obvious treasurer was highlighting that under normal circumstances, that's a grant that we normally use, which is obviously budgeted in our HSDG for those kind of interventions. At a municipal level as well, there's that one covering province and municipalities. And then the framework, obvious, when expediting responses for repairs of housing units damaged during natural disasters. We've got that framework. And then we've got the standard operating procedure that we have in terms of our emergency housing program policy. And there's monitoring and reporting, obviously, that we have as part of our normal processes. Approach of addressing this disaster is that it has been explained as well that we normally reprioritize our budgets by taking money that is already on the existing budget, that like we did in April, that we had to utilize the money that we have instead of waiting for the money of disaster, because normally every disaster funding takes about 18 months to come through. So what we have normally done now and learned in the past is that it's always good to just reprioritize the budget. What it means that you take the later part of the year funding in projects that are already in your business plan and put it forward in terms of you to allow that you continue the normal projects while you also have the disaster. So later in the year, that's when we do the reprioritization of having to go and request for those monies when they do come through. And then we just simply adjust in terms of your adjustment budgets like we normally do when we have gone to Parliament. Implementation support is that we normally, even currently, we've got a joint operating coordinating committee that is at national, provincial, as part of accountability for us to really be able to have work streams. Because the most important part is that all of these work streams have got to be there, which is finance, governance, and also the one that deal with the normal programs on the ground. And in that way, we are able to align our systems in terms of both entities. It can be NHBRC, HDA, as it was also highlighted here, because that's why we're able to go through to Public Works with speed to say we request these kind of properties. And we're glad to see all of those properties now that are highlighted in terms of the requests that we've done. So, and obviously we are indicating that Northwest has also started with its JOG, despite adverse to do, has not started. So that's what National is also indicating, that it will be much more prudent for them to have that one, because it does assist for us to talk in terms of coordination. There's ongoing continuous monitoring and oversight of these programs. It is with regard to real-time audit, currently, that's because it's quite new that this time around we've got the internal auditors, both from provincial audits and also from AG, who are also conducting ongoing oversight. These are general, DM has already highlighted this one of saying getting proper land, and obviously in order to accommodate those that are in the community care centers because of the vast numbers of areas that were affected. So in other words, we have to conduct proper assessments of those pieces of land before we can do anything. There's elements of business forums that were also highlighted, even when NCPU did visit the areas, and community acceptance of the temporary residential areas. This can be also in other communities. The beneficiary lists that are being interfered by councillors, because this is very common even now, where you go into the area, you find that definitely there's also that interference of some of those lists. As such, when you go to the ground, you find that the house that was supposed to have been documented on the disaster is not there. And then we need to really accommodate them now when you're on the ground, because you go there, you find this house was not documented, but the others were documented. And definitely that's a complete anomaly find. And that can be an audit query, whereas you were correcting what was an abnormal situation on the ground. So in terms of this, we just highlight there in terms of the emergency house programs that is coming from the Housing Act of 107, 1997. And there's Part A and Part B that we are indicating in terms of directives. And also to say that this assistance includes possible relocation and resettlement of people on a voluntary and cooperative basis in those appropriate cases. So the grant framework, I think, has been explained. I don't have to just dwell much. I've just quote few areas to provide funding to provinces to repair damage to housing for low-income households following a disaster or housing emergency if the cost of repairs are less than the cost of relocation and provision of temporary shelters. So that's what we apply through and through. In other areas, obviously, there's provision of materials, as we've seen in certain areas. The costing of it has been highlighted as well in terms of the subsidy quantum, including the whole TRU. Issues that we are learning currently is that it's very important also in terms of services that we are also built into this, because the role that municipalities need to play in order to provide services to these areas is now becoming much more crucial. And we are really costing those issues going forward. Requirements for establishment of a TRU is that it's a prerequisite that a TRA is established and all pre-planning requirements are completed. In other words, for now, to avoid people just being moved as it was happening all in Dela, these are issues that we are putting forward to say it should really be a pre-permanent setup where a person doesn't have to be relocated all the time. So in other words, we build it up and upgrade as we are putting those issues there in terms of environmental planning, scoping, and also the issues. It's slide 10. Okay. So the contents of emergency grant application form, those are the issues that are there. The most important that I would really like to highlight is that one of community profile, because that's where you spend most of the time to verify beneficiaries. And in that case, we have to ensure that the one that is benefiting is not double dipping, because some of the community members, they do bypass the system and want to bypass it through by all means. And we find that he has already sold, and he was also in a rental area, but now wants to be now in a permanent. And you find that, no, definitely he's really owning a property somewhere. So it's always very crucial to really verify these issues before you do a proper intervention. So that's why we have also taken some of them to social housing areas to say, this one just wants to continue in terms of rental. So we have got to check with the social housing institute to say, this one wants to really continue to rent. So in that area, we've got to also ensure that they go towards the correct programs. So it's not only just all of them going to TRUs. There are also those that are permanent, that are waiting for a house. And there are projects that are running, and we found that definitely we need to continue running with the projects so they can go back to their own projects. So in that way, we are able to differentiate each and every person that is in that care center. I thought let me just highlight those issues. Yeah, so this is in terms of the overview of the assessment from the various provinces, because this will be coming through in the various presentation from provinces as well. So I think I'm not going to repeat, Chair, because I can see the one from KZN is similar what the MPC was indicating, to say it will be a repetition if it's coming through there.
Yes, thank you very much, Mdu. I'm a bit worried I'm not taking over from the chairs. We're given 30 minutes as a Department of Human Settlements, so each province must take 10 minutes to present. I'm going to request HOD from
No,
North-
DM, don't worry, they are coming, the others in the afternoon. Yeah, if I use Honorable Magadla, Mangu, Hlengwa's approach, when they are chairing their committees, it's very interesting. When you come to present to their committees, they normally say, no, we've read the presentation, let's engage. And then you can see with the questions that they are more than ready. I can assure you that our committee members are ready, they've read the reports. We save the best for last. My brother, Deputy Minister Mahlobo, Water and Sanitation.
No,
The last presentation.
thank you, Excellency. Wena Wegnen, Babnyambi, and also Your Excellency, Comrade Coach Frolik, ministers and deputy ministers, the premiers, especially KZN, Babzigalala and Mape for Northwest, and the lead delegation led by Comrade MEC Ngata for the Eastern Cape and other MECs, and members of the ad hoc committee. On our case, Chair, we have made a presentation. I will do the introduction, and the DG will take us through our presentation. And our presentation, Chair, has been circulated on time. And in the main, with respect to water and sanitation, water is a very sensitive issue, very, very sensitive. And when the floods strike, they affected the 3 provinces as it has been indicated. But the biggest hit province in the main was KwaZulu-Natal. KwaZulu-Natal was hit on the basis of bulk infrastructure. In other words, the assurance of a supply or the availability of water was one of the biggest challenges. Even ourselves as a department through our water board, we had very serious issues around bulk infrastructure that was taken away. And we must commend your committee because you've been on the ground. We know that some of you have been to an area called Wangolosi, where we have seen those biggest pipes. They are called aqueducts. Aqueduct 1 and 2, where you lost nearly more than 200 million liters of water per day that could have been supplied. And when you go to the Eastern Cape, a number of areas were affected, some of those districts. But the damages in the Eastern Cape, they were not so big. Well, I know that MEC Ngata will always raise the matter of Buffalo City because there were disasters before, but they are not part of the declaration. But you'll also raise the matter of Gqeberha. Every time he sees us, he will talk about Gqeberha. And in the Northwest Premier, we know Ngaka Modiri was the one that is affected, but we have a number of issues because the water challenges are main. We can indicate that we came in as a department led by Minister under the directive of the President. We created an institutional mechanism. An institutional mechanism, we created a water war room. It involved a number of departments nationally that is associated with our work, including COGTA, especially their agency, MISA. We involved the affected provinces, the province of KwaZulu-Natal through the Office of the Premier, and then the relevant departments, including the municipalities that were affected. And in the main, the war room has been reporting to Provincial Disaster Management Center, ultimately to the National Disaster Management Center. Their main task was to ensure that people are actually given water as a matter of urgency. The presentation by the NDMC, they lost a lot of water in terms of assurance of availability of water. We lost, within that particular time, more than 50% of the water we normally provide of more than 800 million liters per day. We came to close to about 300 and something. And the system has been stabilized as we speak right now. Stabilized because in terms of our intervention, we brought the water boards closer at the disposal of these municipalities. We're to secure the availability of water. Most of the issues around bulk supply were currently now at more than 500 million that we're able to provide, especially in the most affected epicenter, which is Devon, eThekwini. But what we need also to mention, Chair, is that in as much as the assurance of supply is improved in most of the areas, there are areas that are still cut off, that doesn't have water. In the main, in the north, and you've been there to the north, and it's caused because the bulk infrastructure is totally collapsed and totally washed away. In instances where water was not available, we pull all resources ourselves, that the presentation will indicate. We're able to supply people in a short term through water cutting. We must admit, the water cutting had problems around the issues of management, distribution, and it's still a sore point in other areas, but there has been some improvements. But at the beginning, it was the biggest issue. One of the issues we also experienced, co-chairs, municipalities are at the weakest as we speak right now in the country. And most of them, they are unable to discharge the responsibility of being water services authority, whether they are metros or not. There is not a single one that is not struggling. In KZN as an example, but all over, one of the biggest issues is non-revenue water. The infrastructure is old, very old. Even now we can provide them water, but they are losing 51%, especially eThekwini. 51% goes underground. If we give them 500 million liters, we know that more than 200 million is going to be lost. And in the main, we are working together to ensure that at least it's a fix up. But it's a temporary solution because even before the floods hit, we've reached a stage where the pipes must be replaced, Chair. That's why our assessment as a department and the assessment by MISA, we need a lot of billions of rands. We must replace the infrastructure. We can also indicate, Chair, that in as much as we've dealt with in terms of stabilization, we've brought in the technical teams, they've done assessment, plans have been developed, implementation is happening. One of the problems that is not being attended to is the state of the wastewater treatment works. As we speak, when the flooding happened, eThekwini before, they'd already had sewer going into the sea, going to our rivers, but the main systems was washed away. In the Eastern Cape and in the Northwest, the kind of the toilet system they're using, the sanitation system they're using got flooded. The sewer had to be able to be running out into people's surrounding, including our rivers. Pollution, Chair, is the biggest issue. It's continuing as we sit here. In that metro, I'm making an example, more than 300 million liters. They don't go to the treatment plant to be treated. And they go to the environment. And millions of rands are required to do these things. Therefore, the last stage of rebuilding, renewal of infrastructure is going to be the biggest stage. But at the very same, our attitude as a department is to say, we don't want this infrastructure to be restored or rebuilt to the same capacity. It must be rebuilt into a capacity that takes into account that it is growth. Because if you actually do it into the same standard, it's just a waste of time, Chair. And we thought we should be able to raise that issue. The other matter that we could improve is engagement with communities. Communities, how we communicate, and how we share the plans. And in a number of instances, communities are very agitated because you can't live without water. And some of them, they've taken it into the streets, but the leadership on the ground are addressing those issues. The last point I want to raise is that there are organizations that are responding in terms of social compact and solidarity. In our own space, we've been assisted, even other private companies. I remember when there was a problem at Tegwin, business had brought some engineers. The gift of the givers is assisting in many areas. And in certain instances, a KwaZulu-Natal bottling company called Aquila has been assisting around water. In as much as there are certain instances where people wanted to politicize issues of water around donations and certain communities being neglected, the Defense Force for South Africa has also played an important role, and the other people that are there. But generally, I think we've tried to stabilize the situation. The situation remains very sensitive, Chair. And we need a lot of support, but also around building of institutions, around the institutional capability. At this stage, I'll ask the DG, Dr. Sean Phillips, to go through some of the issues that have been raised.
You are done.
Chairperson, you must
Minister
protect me.
Kungubele, please.
He's done.
Let's allow Dr. Phillips, the DG, to take us through.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm presenting on damage to water and sanitation infrastructure in the 3 provinces of KZN, Eastern Cape and Northwest. The damage in KZN is far more than in the Eastern Cape and Northwest, and within KZN, the damage is far more in eThekwini than in other municipalities. This slide summarizes the damage in the eThekwini area immediately after the floods, which indicates that in the north of Durban, the red areas on the map, that's a map of eThekwini, the red areas of the map show where there was no water supply at all immediately after the floods in eThekwini. In the north of Durban, water supply was reduced by 250 megalitres per day. In the south, it was reduced by 100 megalitres per day due to damage to infrastructure, and in Tongaat, it was reduced by 16 megalitres per day. And there were other areas such as Hazelmere and Wickens water treatment works which were impacted where no water could be supplied for approximately a week due to high levels of turbidity. Next slide, please. Only one part of our national water and sanitation infrastructure was mildly affected by the floods, and that was Hazelmere Dam, where we're in the process of raising the dam wall, to be able to supply more water to eThekwini and other areas. The construction work was temporarily stopped because the dam overflowed, but the work is back in progress again, and this will result in increased water supply, bulk water supply from us to the cities and towns in KZN. We're also working on the Umgeni project and preparing for it to increase bulk water supply. But in summary, Chairperson, bulk water supply from DWS is not a major constraint to increasing water supply to communities in KZN. Currently, the major constraint is the damage to the municipal water and sanitation infrastructure. Next slide, please. We're responsible for Umgeni Water, which provides bulk distribution infrastructure on behalf of municipalities in the province, including eThekwini. And you can see 2 of the major Umgeni water aqueducts were badly damaged in the floods. Next slide, please. So aqueducts 1 and 2 were washed away in several places, which reduced water supply significantly from Nagel Dam to the Durban Heights water treatment works. Quickly, an alternative supply was brought in place from Inanda Dam to make up the deficit, which enabled us to reduce the deficit from 300 megalitres a day to 32 megalitres per day. Umgeni Water has insurance for its infrastructure, but they're not waiting to get the insurance money. They are using their own funds in the meantime, and they've appointed contractors to do the major repairs to those aqueducts, which is in the region of approximately R1 billion. One aqueduct will be repaired by December this year, and the other by June next year. Next slide, please. In order to support the municipalities which were badly affected, which were primarily eThekwini, Ugu, and Ilembe municipalities, our minister set up a water and sanitation war room, which was headed by the head of water and sanitation in eThekwini. Immediately on the Easter weekend following the floods, we were getting urgent requests from eThekwini in particular, but also the other two municipalities, to help them with water tankers, because it was apparent, as depicted from that earlier map, there were quite large areas which had no water supply at all. So we responded rapidly to that request to assist them with water tankers, and we got permission from National Treasury to reprioritize a portion of our grants. Normally, we are not allowed to give our grants to metropolitan municipalities. They get their grants for water and sanitation from human settlements, from the USDG. But Treasury quickly approved for us to reorient some of our grants to enable us to use emergency procurement to hire 82 tankers to assist these three municipalities, and those were supplied by the end of the Easter weekend, and to assist them to provide water to areas which had no water at all. We also deployed other resources to support the work streams which were established under the war room, to do things, to assist with things like assessment of the infrastructure damage, to monitor water quality, and to assist with communications. Next slide, please. In the infrastructure work team, we deployed a team of multidisciplinary engineers, civil, mechanical, and electrical, and geotech specialists to assist the municipalities with the assessment and quantification of the damage. The initial assessments were completed by the end of April, and then we did more detailed assessments to verify the initial assessments, and those more detailed assessments were completed by the 21st of May. Next slide, please. This again shows some pictures of the damage. You can see the wastewater treatment works in eThekwini. Several of them were very badly damaged. You can see there's one picture there of a sewer line which is completely broken and raw sewage running out. Next slide, please. So, as indicated by the Deputy Minister, eThekwini and the other municipalities have made progress in terms of restoring water supply. And this slide shows for eThekwini the extent to which normal water supply has been restored through temporary repairs in the different regions of eThekwini. So, for example, in the inner west region, it's been restored from 30% immediately after the floods to 80%. In the outer west region, from 45% to 80%. Central region, 45% to 70%. Southern region, 15% to 85%. And northern region, from 40% to 60%. In order to fully restore, much more substantial repair work needs to be done to the infrastructure. This restoration has been achieved largely through temporary repairs, while resolution of the funding issues for the more substantial infrastructure repairs is awaited. This slide shows the costings of the repairs, of the required repairs, which we worked on together with the various municipalities in KZN. And I'll run through the costs municipality by municipality. The third column shows the initial cost estimates done by the municipalities with our support, and the column on the right, which is the key column, shows our revised cost estimates based on more detailed assessments. So you can see from this slide that by far the biggest damage is in eThekwini, with 912 million worth of assessed damage in eThekwini to water and sanitation infrastructure, 305 million of which is water, and very substantial damage to the wastewater infrastructure, 606 million rand of damage to the wastewater infrastructure. In Ilembe, it's 34 million. In King Chetwayo, it's almost 14 million. In Mkhlatuzi, it's 1.8 million. In Umsunduzi, it's 450,000. In Ugu, it's 19 million. Next slide, please. In Ngongondlovo, it's 1.1 million. In Utugela, 12 million. In Amajuba, 3.9 million. In Umzinyati, 12.1 million. In Zululand, 7.6 million. Next slide, please. In Umkanyugudi, 5 million. In Harigwala, 21 million. Umgeni's, as I indicated, Umgeni, the damage to the aqueducts under Umgeni water is 900 million, close to $1 billion. So the grand total on the right-hand side of our estimates of the damage to the water and sanitation infrastructure is 2.2 billion. Next slide, please. In terms of funding applications, as I indicated, we worked with the municipalities and assisted them to compile costed lists of all the damaged infrastructure, and we separately submitted funding requests to the National Disaster Management Center and to COGTA on the 3rd of May. Since then, there's been engagements, and we've also submitted our refined cost estimates. In addition to looking at replacing the infrastructure as it was, we also investigated how much it would cost if the infrastructure wasn't just replaced as it was, but it was replaced in such a way that it would be able to meet future demand. In other words, to build back better with upgraded infrastructure. And if it's going to be done in that way, the cost estimate rises from 2.2 billion to 7.8 billion. To date, in several municipalities, there's been reprioritization of existing grant funds to do repairs. There's been some initial disaster funding approved for Umsunduzi and Ilembe, and some recommended for Ugu. As indicated by the Premier, there are some complications with finalizing allocations to eThekwini, given that eThekwini has insurance for some of its infrastructure, and that complication appears to be delaying the allocation of disaster funding to eThekwini. So in summary, with regard to KZN, much of the water services have been restored, although albeit by doing temporary repairs, and there's a need to do much more substantial infrastructure repairs on the water infrastructure. We are very worried, as indicated by the Deputy Minister, about the state of wastewater treatment works and sewage pumping stations in eThekwini in particular, where, as indicated by the Deputy Minister, in eThekwini, 350 megalitres of raw sewage per day is flowing into the environment, into the rivers and into the sea because of the state of the wastewater infrastructure as it was damaged by the floods. Unfortunately, there was a mini flood again in May, which set back some of the restoration efforts, particularly for the wastewater treatment works. And although the first round of disaster fundings have been approved by the National Disaster Management Center, there's an urgent need to expedite further rounds of disaster funding. And as the work is done, we will monitor the restoration work by the municipalities. Turning to the Eastern Cape Province. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary of the damage in the Eastern Cape Province, which was much less than in KZN. In OR Tambo district municipalities, all municipalities were affected, with Port St. John's being the hardest hit. In Alfred and Zoe, there was some minor incidents of water and sanitation infrastructure damages, and they've all been fixed using their maintenance budget. In Joe Harvey, there were certain local municipalities affected. In Amatoli, all local municipalities were affected with some damage, which I'll get into just now. And in Chris Hani District Municipality, although the floods were severe, water and sanitation infrastructure was not affected. Next slide, please. In Amatoli District Municipality, this slide shows the detail of the damage in the various municipalities. Next slide, please. Sorry, just go back to Amatoli, the previous slide. On Amatoli, it shows the detail of the damage in Amatoli. They have already reprioritized some of their water services infrastructure grant budget allocation, and they have already done some of the repairs by reprioritizing some of the existing budget allocations. We've been working with them to do cost estimates and to assist them to prepare a technical report to apply for flood damage, which is currently estimated at approximately 22 million. Next slide, please. In OR Tambo, they have also reprioritized their existing grant funding and carried out much of the repairs already, and we've been assisting them with providing water tankers to provide water to